Hello everyone, my name's Tyler. Welcome to another episode of Fortnite Battle Royale Ideas, the series where you give your ideas for Fortnite and I'll give you my thoughts and implementations on the ideas. In today's video, we will be talking about a bow and arrow, a weapon separate than the crossbow, a bow and arrow. Today's video idea comes from Leonardo Caviacholo, who mentions a crossbow and bow idea. WPK mentions a crossbow and bow and arrow with some differences to velocity, damage, and stealth, and Nerfy, who provided an image from Imager. You may be thinking there wouldn't be much of a gameplay difference between the crossbow and the bow and arrow, and in some ways you'd be right. But I've got a lot of ideas that would set the bow apart from the crossbow and some really cool abilities it could have. In the background, you're seeing some squad gameplay where we drop in at tilted towers. This is one of the only times you will see less than 20 people here. It was only us and two other squads that dropped here. We managed to take out a squad who was pretty spread out, and after that we spot another squad at the other end of Tilted. While my teammates were keeping an eye on them, I'm watching the squad coming in from the storm behind us, picking off some long-distance shots to keep them at bay. After two of my teammates fall to their down state off the building we were on, we moved to the hilltop beside Tilted to get some recon out before we move to the next circle. I choose to break away from the group slightly, and it all goes downhill from there. You will be seeing some gameplay from another game pertinent to the topic of this video as well. If you enjoyed the gameplay, give the video a thumbs up. To clarify, the idea of a bow and crossbow was mentioned to me before the crossbow was added. It's cool to see additions into the game that the player base wants. Since the crossbow is in the game, let's use some of its characteristics as a starting point and a differentiating point for the bow and arrow idea. My favorite thing about the crossbow is its scope. The scope alone is great for recon. It's also a stealthy item. Players are highly unlikely to hear you shoot it, but it's fairly easy to hear the arrow coming your direction. This combination makes it hard to detect where the arrow came from. It doesn't hit as hard as a sniper, but you can hit someone from almost just as far while at the same time remaining stealthy to anyone else in the vicinity. One attribute I wasn't expecting when they added it into the game was the fact that it had infinite ammo. You have to reload it every 5 arrows, but having unlimited of them didn't sit well with me. Honestly, the thought of it still doesn't sit well with me, though I have no real problem with it because it's challenging to use and it's really not OP in any way. Epic Games at it again with doing something that sounds ridiculously overpowered while remaining perfectly balanced. Its fire rate is at a comfortable level so that it's not a hassle to shoot again while also not being spammy. The reload time also feels right where it should be. So, how are we to add in a bow and arrow, an item that sounds so similar to a crossbow if the crossbow already provides something new and balanced to the game? How can we set the bow apart from simply being a worse version of the crossbow? Well, honestly, the bow and arrow could be a worse version of the crossbow. Less damage, less range, and comes in at common and uncommon rarities. But that wouldn't be much of an idea now, would it? Here's what I'm proposing. The bow and arrow does not have a scope. The crossbow is going to be able to fire at longer distances, so it makes sense to have a scope on that. That alone would make the crossbow worthwhile to me. If the bow doesn't have that, then wouldn't it just be worse? Well, maybe you don't like the scope, but also, if there's no scope on it, the bow would be more viable at close to medium range than the crossbow. I don't mean to fall into a cliche here, but the balancing factor that is usually incorporated into the game when a weapon is better suited for close to medium range than its long distance counterpart is fire rate. Its fire rate is increased, and if its fire rate is increased, its damage must be decreased to balance it. So, yes, in a way, think of the crossbow as an assault rifle and the bow and arrow as an SMG. That's not to say the bow and arrow would have the same fire rate as an SMG. That wouldn't set it apart from the SMG and also wouldn't make much sense, not that a lot of sense is needed as this is Fortnite after all. But let's start with the fire rate and get into some unique fun characteristics. I'm going to be drawing a lot of inspiration from Horizon Zero Dawn for how I think the bow and arrow should work within the game. If you haven't played Horizon, I highly recommend it as it's a great and innovative game. Your main weapon is a bow, and you can have many different forms of a bow with different characteristics. The bows in Horizon, as well as how I think they should work within Fortnite, are as follows. You can spam the trigger to fire arrow after arrow after arrow quickly, or you can hold down the trigger to hone in your aim and release it for a more accurate shot. So here's how it works. You aim in and press the trigger button. You will see your crosshairs tighten and condense down. You will notice in Fortnite that when you are hip firing, your spread is greater and less accurate. When you ADS, you will notice your crosshairs get smaller. And when you crouch while ADS, your crosshairs get smaller yet again. When you fire your weapon, your bullets will go somewhere within those crosshairs. That's why tap firing and crouching makes you more accurate, because your crosshairs are smaller and there's less room for error. As you will see in Horizon, you can spam arrows quickly, but your bloom is so great that there's really no chance of you hitting your target, at least at range. Up close, this would be useful because this would be a spray and pray tactic, if you will. You'd be slinging bullets that probably won't hit or do a lot of damage, but you'd be slinging a lot of them, so odds are you're going to hit some. Given enough time, this has the potential to accumulate some decent damage. and at range, while you might be lucky to get that one shot, it'd be more useful as a suppressive fire. One of my favorite tactics is to have one person constantly fire on an enemy. The enemy has to respond by avoiding fire, building cover, and doing anything they can to survive or to fight back. This means that the enemy is going to hopefully be in a panic, or at the very least, be so occupied with that you can set up a flank while they're distracted. Being able to spam arrows is another way to lay down this suppressive fire, and this would be an even greater ability if you have unlimited ammo like the crossbow. You won't have to worry about the reload because it only takes a fraction of a second to notch the next arrow, and you won't have to worry about running out of ammo. On the inverse side of the bow and arrow, you could hold down the trigger to draw your bow. The longer you hold it down, the more accurate it's going to be until your crosshair closes in completely, making your shot 100% accurate. The caveat being it's a projectile weapon, so there would be some lead time and some drop over distance. I don't imagine it would even take a full second to fully close in your crosshairs to this level of accuracy. Spam firing might take around 4 arrows a second, while completely drawing your bow would allow you to shoot 2 shots a second, and any time in between that. So if you wanted to be a little more accurate and at least get the arrows in a general vicinity, but didn't have quite enough time for the full draw, you would hold down the trigger to draw back your bow slightly, which could be anywhere in between an instant press to a full draw. I imagine the way it would work and the timing would be identical to Horizon. They could even add variants of the bow. You could have a standard one that works exactly as mentioned, and they could have a rarer variant that would be closer to a sniper type of bow. Horizon has this as well. It's the same thing, except it does more damage and is more accurate. The downside, or the balancing factor, is that it takes a substantially longer amount of time to draw. Another aspect they could add that's also in Horizon, and one I've done a video on, is ammo types. Stun effects, impact arrows that do damage to structures, or flame arrows that do sustaining damage. I think there's a lot of possibilities with ammo types, and specifically with arrows. Another cool ability is the ability to notch multiple arrows. You would be able to press a button to notch an additional arrow. The next time you fire, you would shoot 2 arrows. You would be able to notch up to 3 max. This would take a split second to do. Notching multiple arrows would allow you to deal more damage, or if you had multiple arrows notched and at the ready, you could fire off a shot with a higher chance of hitting your target even if you didn't draw your bow back all the way. With there being an unlimited amount of ammo, there's really no concern for ammo conservation. Given the right circumstances and enough time, your first shot in any engagement should be 3 arrows. Even if you were to back down or take cover mid-fight, you would still probably have enough time to notch another arrow or 2 before you re-engaged. The combination of stealth, being able to notch multiple arrows at once, the ability to spam a bunch of arrows quickly, and the ability to fully draw your bow for maximum accuracy makes the bow and arrow a highly versatile weapon that will not only cater to a bunch of situations, but also to a variety of playstyles. Some items, like the crossbow even, one might never even think to pick up. But I think integrating a bow and arrow in the ways I mentioned would be such a diverse tool that anyone would like it and find a use for it. What do you think of the bow and arrow mechanisms I mentioned? If you've played Horizon, I'm curious on your opinion of using the exact same bow combat system. If you haven't played Horizon yet, you need to. It's the most innovative game I've played. The story and setting is great, and its gameplay is perfectly matched with smooth mechanics and intuitive UI while also providing challenging gameplay that feels natural. Thanks so much for watching. Leave your comments on the bow and arrow below, subscribe for Fortnite and all things gaming. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. This has been Toast, and I'll see you on the next video.